Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. Before we continue, I will be streaming some Mario Kart over on my second channel tonight at about 9 p.m. Eastern time. I'll put a link down in the description. So, the New Republic was very well known for using captured or surrendered Imperial vessels, and truly their navy was made up largely of Star Destroyers, which became the offensive backbone of their fleet. However, on even rarer occasions, the New Republic would also make use of captured dreadnoughts, or, after the Bastion Accords, dreadnoughts shared by the Empire. Most notably, this included the Super Star Destroyer Lusatia, but also the Guardian, Megador, and possibly more. However, that was the New Republic. When talking about the Rebel Alliance, i.e. the Alliance faction pre-Endor, it was much more difficult for them to capture and make use of very large ships, and they only very rarely utilized captured Star Destroyers and never captured Super Star Destroyers. There were several reasons for this, and the first was probably just simply the difficulty in overwhelming the massive defenses of a very large Imperial ship. The Alliance's best strategy when on the offensive involved hit-and-run attacks, which were very frequently carried out by starfighters only, with X-Wings and Y-Wings essentially launching their ordnance, ensuring crippling damage, then leaving. This made capturing ships fairly difficult. The rebels would need to somehow get enough troops on board to beat back the thousands and thousands of onboard stormtroopers, which would certainly not be easy given their aforementioned attack patterns and the size of transports they need. It also simply wasn't very common for the Alliance to have an opportunity to keep a Star Destroyer in place or to be in a position where they had overwhelming firepower. There were, however, some options when it came to capturing ships, notably stealing vessels while docked. And legend shows us several occasions where the New Republic attacked a docked Super Star Destroyer, so it's not impossible to imagine that they might steal one. However, it would be very, very difficult and would basically need the perfect situation. It's also very, very likely that any dreadnought captured by the rebels would not be fully completed. But even assuming they could nab one, what would they do with it? Well, many people are familiar with Mon Mothma's annotation in the Imperial Handbook where she says they're not even sure whether the rebels could man a captured Super Star Destroyer, but I don't think that's quite accurate. We know that a regular Super Star Destroyer would operate with a crew of about 50,000. It's most likely that automation, although that might take some time, could definitely lower that number, and given the fact that the Essential Guide to Warfare tells us that the rebels had a low single-digit percentage of the Empire's naval power, they definitely do have enough personnel to man the ship, but it would represent a significant portion of their naval assets. It would be a lot of eggs in one, albeit very tough basket, but still, given the importance that such a ship would take on, if the Alliance did decide to man it, you wouldn't want to risk it directly in battle if there were other options, especially given how big, slow, and hulking the Executor is, and the fact that ships with those qualities don't really fit well into Rebel naval doctrine. If automated, the personnel costs would definitely decrease some, however we know that automated ships are generally much less effective, especially in Star Wars Legends. So you automate an already unwieldy vessel and you might lose it, but on the other hand, if you staff it to the brim and bring it out at full efficiency, there's also a huge risk to your faction, especially, as I said, given the unwieldiness of a ship and the Empire's use of interdictors. There's also the fact that the Empire could actually oppose a Super Star Destroyer with pure firepower, and one of the Super Star Destroyer's chief aspects is the fact that it is absolutely overwhelming against an enemy. That's an element of the Tarkin doctrine. And as such, the vessel is designed to be as much a psychological tool as an actually useful and practical naval asset. The Tarkin doctrine won't really be effective against the Empire because, well, you have one Super Star Destroyer, and I've predicted in other videos that the Empire had at least 60. So generally, I don't think using a Super Star Destroyer offensively would be the Alliance's best strategy, although there are certain niche situations that could make it useful. But even in an all-out battle, manning the Executor would likely mean abandoning other more efficient ships. The Executor was supremely powerful, but pound per pound, I would argue that it's probably beat by something like a Mon Calamari cruiser, at least in practical effectiveness. So if you're manning that ship you're generally decreasing the efficiency of your navy. But there's another very serious issue, and that is maintenance and resources. I've been talking generally as if the Alliance captured an Executor SSD, but really any Super Star Destroyer would be almost unfathomably expensive to run. We see this on a smaller scale with the Errant Venture, a private Super Star Destroyer owned by Booster Tarek rather than a galactic military like most Star Destroyers. He found the ship to be very hard to man with the necessary engineers and could not afford to pay for routine maintenance, ordnance, Tabana gas, and fuel. He was forced to run the ship basically without any defensive options, having to cannibalize various weapons for parts. A Super Star Destroyer is basically that times 10. So given the resources of the Rebel Alliance, I do think it would technically be possible to man such a ship, but it would be very, very expensive. And that means that there's a very big opportunity cost to be considered here. If you're manning the Super Star Destroyer, that's not only calling several ships out of service, but also limiting your ability to purchase other supplies. Still, one interesting option would be the Super Star Destroyer as a mobile base. We know the Alliance used a stateless strategy. They moved around a lot, they didn't stay tied to planets they would have to defend, and by Return of the Jedi, we see that much of the Alliance seems to be mobile in capital ships. So basically, instead of having a base on Hoth, perhaps you just keep everybody in the Super Star Destroyer. However, generally, I also think that this would be a mistake. A Super Star Destroyer is easier to track than lying low on some outskirt planet. It's not exactly inconspicuous, and I think referring back to what I said earlier, it's essentially putting all of your eggs in one basket. Yes, you can defend yourself, but it's going to be hard to escape if you are attacked. You won't be able to hold transports or ships for every personnel on the vessel. Also, if that one Super Star Destroyer is destroyed, well, you've essentially cut the head off the Alliance. I think it's much better to keep your leaders decentralized, keep them across the galaxy, and if you keep with that doctrine, I don't think you can justify the cost of having one very large, very expensive mobile base. Another perhaps interesting option would be the Super Star Destroyer essentially as a base for major battles. Maybe you keep it hidden somewhere, but if you need to fight, you jump the ship into a system, you unload the perhaps thousands of stored fighters from its hangar, and you do a quick hit and run attack, then leave it. I think it would also be interesting to maybe just station it in orbit somewhere, turn all secondary systems off, don't use the engines or anything, just have it orbit a planet, and maybe use it as a hospital ship, or maybe as a command post that in the most dire circumstances can be turned on and moved. That, I think, is possible. Once you already have the ship, I mean, you might as well make some use of it rather than just abandoning it. Perhaps you could take it apart and make other ships, or, as I said, you could do one of the two strategies that I just mentioned. However, there's one final option, and one I think would be attractive to the Alliance. That is the Emperor's Spear approach. During the Yuuzhan Vong War, the New Republic took the Lucenkia Super Star Destroyer, they took all of the weapons and systems off and refitted other ships, then they basically filled the Lucenkia with explosives and rammed it into a massive Yuuzhan Vong world ship. Given the Empire's tendency to make very large vessels, that kind of seems like a good option. Ram the captured ship into Kuat drive yards, or the Death Star, or another Super Star Destroyer, and you can do serious damage. I think it's very possible that a Super Star Destroyer loaded to the brim with explosives could have crippled or destroyed the Death Star, especially if it hit it in the right location. But then again, the Rebels already have a public image of being terrorists, so maybe that's not something they want to encourage. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the subject. I only have a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is that the Rebels actually did use a battle cruiser in Legends, although we only really get a few references to it. There's also a captured Super Star Destroyer used by a pirate group in Star Wars canon. So both of those kind of speak to scale and just the practicality of doing some of the things I've mentioned in today's video. That's all for now, though this one's going long, so I'll do a hashtag AskEck question in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. As always, this has been your host and friend, EckhartsLadder. Please be safe, wash your hands, don't let anyone cough on you, stay home, and may the Force be with you.